So you want to change the world, right? You didn't seen some shit that you don't necessarily like that's going on. Maybe it's police brutality. Maybe it's, people not getting jobs or whatever. You want to do something about it. Well, there's a few ways you can go about doing that, right? And I'm about to explain some of the differences. So what a lot of people tell you, especially if you went to like any type of human service school or college or anything like that, or even there's videos on YouTube about this, is there's 4 different ways that people go about changing things that they see wrong in the world, right? One is through direct service work. Now that's designed to help individual people with individual situations. An example of that is, let's say I see a kid that needs some shoes, right? He ain't got no shoes to go to school or whatever. And I decide that I'm going to go to the store and, buy him some shoes and donate them to him or whatever, right? That's called individual service work. So that's helpful. That works in individual situations, right? But then let's just say, for instance, upon giving the kid the shoes, I realized that he ain't got no house, right? And his parents are not really in a position to really do anything about it, right? I can't donate the kid a house. So what I do is I go and I do what's called advocacy, where I go to different resources that I know can help him out and speak up for him and let them know that, like, this person needs help. Maybe they help or maybe they won't. But that's another area or another category of helping. It's called advocacy, right? Now let's say I want to take it to the next level after that, which is I myself decide that it's not good enough to just, go and talk to people about whatever the kid's issue is or whatever. And I decide that I want to take it upon myself to rally people together, and I'm going to start a social service organization or whatever, right, to help kids like that. That's called activism, okay? When me, myself, I go out and I decide that I want to do something about this. I want to make a difference, and I want to get my hands dirty in doing it. As a matter of fact, I actually do some work with an organization that was pretty much put together like that. It's called the Alliance for African Assistance, and there's a few others out there. But that's another category, right? Now, the final category, and the one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about today, is called community organizing. Now, what is community organizing? Community organizing is the same thing as activism, except for it's done in a group setting. The end result of community organizing should be the formation of an organization designed to help a particular group of people with particular issues they're going through. So examples of that were, back in the day, we as black people, we had the NAACP. We also had, a few other community-based organizations, right? So nowadays, you don't really see any organizations centered around focusing in on issues of black safety and welfare and proliferation as a culture in this country. You really don't. You see it for other races of people in other different subcategories underneath that, but you don't really want to see, you don't really see black social organizations as you used to. Now, why is that a fact and why is that important? Well, again, you go back to a common era of history that a lot of people are familiar with, the Civil Rights Movement of the 60s, right? The backbone of that particular movement and what made everybody pay attention to it was the fact that you had so many different organizations simply centered around helping black people involved in that. We know some of the major ones. If you study a little bit about black history, you'll know there's an organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right, also known as SNCC. There was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That was the organization that Martin Luther King was from, and a few other people were from. Then you had this organization called CORE. And these were just all in the South. And then you had the churches. You had, the big, huge congregational churches like we kind of have now, right? And then when you get into like the other parts of the United States, you had the Black Muslim organizations. You had the US organization. You had, all kind of different groups out there, right? So what made the Civil Rights Movement powerful is that was the umbrella, essentially, that kind of brought all these different organizations together. And the reason why that's important is because what we see we doing a lot now is we use a particular tool that's a part of community organizing, and we call that a social movement, which is mobilization or protesting, right? Protesting is not a movement. Protesting and marching never changes anything. It's part of what's called public action, which is an element within community organizing. But there's other elements that are there as well. And that's a major reason why I feel like we overemphasize mobilizing and think that that's supposed to replace actual real community organizing. Now, a few more of the elements that are necessary for community organizing to take place are, one, you have to engage in what's called community listening, right? Meaning that, like, you have to do some level of market research. You can't go out and start an organization and not really know if people are going to gravitate towards it or if this is going to solve anybody's particular problem, okay? So that's point number one, is one-on-one you have to go out in the communities that you're trying to service and actually go out and really listen to people and organize around what their concerns are, right? The second thing you do is you start grouping people together and you sort out right away what everyone's self-interest is in this situation. Now, what that means is this, is that one of the core rules in community organizing is people will only meet if they feel there's a reason to, okay? Meaning that, like, I'm not going to go through this whole process and go through all the drama that comes with being involved in trying to change anything if I feel like at the end of the day I'm not going to get anything out of it. Now, what that means for different people is different things. Some people are in it because they have business interests involved. And you kind of have to work those things out, and you kind of have to really, look at it for what it is. Other people, it personally affects them. But that's one of the things that was interesting about the civil rights movement, too, is that once the issues that the civil rights movement were particularly dealing with wasn't really affecting as many people anymore, they just stopped dropping out. It was like, well, that's their problem now. It's another group of people's problem. It's not my problem anymore, right? We call those people the black bourgeoisie or whatever. So that's it. That's something that you got to be really open and honest about when you're engaging in this process. Another thing is that that comes out of the community organizing exercise is the development of leaders. Now, one of the things that we always talk about, a lot of times in the different circles within the black community especially, is why don't we have any new leaders, right? Well, we did in, the late 60s, early 70s or whatever. We did have new crop of leadership come up. But the problem was, again, the people that were engaged in the organizing and the movement at the time felt like by the mid to late 70s, their problems had been solved. A lot of these people ended up becoming, business owners. They ended up doing very well for themselves. They ended up being, pretty well educated. So for them and their families, the issues of discrimination and civil rights or whatever wasn't really important to them anymore. And that's part of the history of social movements. So what should have happened is a new generation of people should have got through the community organizing process again, and a new generation of organizations or people within already established organizations should have took over. And it didn't happen. Essentially, like, I'm 34, so we're talking about a generation of people that was a little bit older than I am, like the equivalent of probably my father and my mother and my aunts and uncles. Their generation decided, we're just going to go out and do our own thing. And you figure it out. But, there's tools out here to really make it happen. And they ignored what was happening to a larger majority of people that were not exposed to those types of opportunities. So our generation came up, in the legacy of that, wondering what the hell are we supposed to do. Then we are told by the same people that were running these movements during the late 70s and during the 60s, oh, well, we got to march. Oh, well, we got to do this. And that's when the whole assumption that one particular type of action is going to create change. That's just not true. What is true is that community organizing, because you're talking about the development of organization and synthesizing community concern, has been the most proven way to create long-standing community change in America, okay? And if you don't believe me, you look at the growth of the gay and lesbian movement, you look at the growth of the Latino influence in American culture. We have presidential candidates. It's like topic number one. is what are we going to do about immigration? And that's a very hot button issue in America, right? You look at issues around the environment. You look at issues around all these other different types of things. Those things become issues because they came as a result of grassroots organizations doing the work of community organizing. So that's just a little bit of my take. I don't want to, really get long-winded, but if anyone has any questions or anything, about how to go about it, there's a lot of resources on the internet, and you can always hit me up on my page. I'm readily available to explain even further about how you start from square one and actually develop a pretty formidable organization and really get out here and try to create, some very long-standing systemic change for ourselves as people. So with that, thank you guys for listening. And if you have any thoughts or questions, get at me. I'm not hard to find. Until then, all power to the people.